Chapter 25. The Works of Thomas Sydenham, Volume 1, Section 5, Scarlet Fever 1, Scarlet Fever, Scarlatina, may appear at any season. Nevertheless, it oftenest breaks out towards the end of summer, when it attacks whole families at once, and more especially the infant part of them. The patients feel rigors and shiverings just as they do in other fevers. The symptoms, however, are moderate. Afterwards, however, the whole skin becomes covered with small red macule, thicker than those of measles, as well as broader, redder, and less uniform. These last for 2 or 3 days, and then disappear. The cuticle peels off, and brandy scales remain, lying upon the surface like meal. They appear and disappear 2 or 3 times. 2, as the disease is in my mind neither more nor less than a moderate effervescence of the blood, arising from the heat of the preceding summer, or from some other exciting cause. I leave the blood as much as possible to its own despumation, and to the elimination of the peccant materials through the pores of the skin. With this view I am chary both of bloodletting and of clysters. By such remedies I hold that a revulsion is created, that the particles inimical to the blood become more intimately mixed therewith, and finally, that the proper movement of nature is checked. On the other hand, I am cautious in the use of cordials. By them the blood may be over-agitated, and so unfitted for the regular and equable separation in which it is engrossed. Besides which, they may act as fuel to fever. I hold it, then, sufficient for the palio, for the adi from animal food and from fermented liquors, to keep always indoors, and not to keep always to his bed. When the desquamation is complete, and when the symptoms are departing, I consider it proper to purge the patient with some mild laxative accommodated to his age and strength. By treatment thus simple and natural, this ailment, we can hardly call it morass dispelled without either trouble or danger. Whereas if, on the other hand, we overtreat the patient by confining him to his bed, or by throwing in cordials, and other superfluous and overlearned medicines, the disease is aggravated, and the sick man dies of his doctor. 8. This, however, must be borne in mind. If there occur at the beginning of the eruption either epileptic fits, or coma, as they often do occur with children or young patients, a large blister must be placed at the back of the neck, and a paregoric draught of syrup of poppies must be administered at once. This last must be repeated every night until he recover. The ordinary drink must be warm milk with 3 parts water, and animal food must be abstained from. Chapter 26. The Works of Thomas Sydenham, Volume 1, Section 5, Pleurisy 1. No disease is more frequent than this. Besides which, it is a disease of all seasons. Nevertheless, it is commonest about the change from spring to summer. At that time, the blood is heated by the fresh vicinity of the sun, breaking out into inordinate action, and effervescing without stop or check. Pleurisy affects sanguine temperaments, laboring men from the country of fever, generally. After a few hours, though frequently much later, the patient is seized with a sharp, pricking pain in the side or in the region of the ribs, which shoots sometimes towards the shoulder blades, sometimes towards the spine, sometimes towards the front of the chest. The cough is frequent and distressing. It arises from the tension of the inflamed parts, and is accompanied with so much pain that the patient holds his breath and checks the first inclinations towards it. The matter brought up by expectoration is, at the onset of the disease, scanty and thin, and frequently streaked with particles of blood, but as the one herat sat, I-1-5-ARID disease proceeds, it becomes more copious and more concocted. Still, however, mixed with blood, the fever proceeds pari passu. Indeed, it takes strength from the symptoms to which it gives origin. And this fever, as well as its concomitant evils, its cough, its bloody sputum, and its pain, decreases gradually, and decreases just in proportion to the free expectoration of the morbific matter. This same morbific matter, however, does not always, during the progress of the disease, attain that degree of concoction which is necessary for expectorate. It frequently happens that the thin and scanty sputum of the beginning of the disease is coughed up throughout, in which case neither the fever nor its symptoms receive 1 iota of amendment, and the patient dies. Sometimes the bowels are confined, sometimes too open, the dejections being frequent and very watery. At times the disease gains strength, venesection having been omitted, so that the patient cannot even cough, suffers from a terrible dyspnoea, and is all but suffocated by the violence of the inflammation. This is sometimes so great that the chest cannot be expanded to the dimensions of a natural respiration without the most exquisite pain. At times, and this again from the omission of the proper venesection suppuration takes place, and pus is effused in the cavity of the thorax. In this case, however much the primary fever may abate, and it may abate altogether, the patient is still in danger. He may die miserably, worn down by the empyema and the hectic fever that succeeded the original disease. Although pleurisy naturally originates in a proper and specific inflammation of blood, an inflammation which engenders it as a primary disease, it may nevertheless supervene as an accident to other fevers, whatever be their kind. The febrile matter being precipitated upon the pleuras, or the intercostal muscles. When this happens, it happens at the beginning of the disease, and arises from the crude state of the febrile matter. This ought to be tempered by appropriate ebullition, and to be prepared for its due separation through more appropriate passages. Generally, however, this form of mischief arises from the unseasonable and preposterous use of overheating medicines. Medicines which are the favorite prescription of certain women of rank, whose charity and benevolence would be better employed in feeding the poor than in physicking them. As far as these ladies act upon any plan at all, they act with the view of promoting perspiration at the onset of the fever, little thinking of the temerity and inefficiency of the attempt. They just disturb nature, who is constrained to the expulsion of the peccant matters during their state of crudity, quad ad porta ruant. This throws them on the meninges of the brain, and thence comes a frenzy, or it throws them on the pleurs of the ribs, and thence comes a pleurisy. The more the season of the year, i.e., the turn from spring to summer, and the age and temperament of the patient favor this last named state of things, the more likely is the disease to be pleuritic. It is an undeniable fact that at the season in question, fevers have a tendency to become pleurisies. 4. Now, if a pleurisy has been, as it were, precipitated after the fashion noticed above, we can make a shrewd guess as to the fact by the color of the blood of our venesections. This blood, at least that of the second and following bleedings, as soon as it has grown cool, looks like melted suet in regard to its consistency, whilst its upper layer looks like true pus. Yet it is no true pus, notwithstanding. It is fiber, the fiber of the rest of the blood, fiber forming a close tissue. It is not separable like pus. If removed from the remaining mass, it looks like tenacious and fibrous cuticle. It is probably neither more nor less than the fibers of the blood, deprived by precipitation of their natural red investment, and coagulated by the contact of the cold atmosphere into a whitish membrane. I must remark, by the way, if the blood, instead of being projected from the vein in a horizontal line, flows downwards along the skin of the patient, however freely it may flow, it will not take the appearance that I have described deep. Why this is I know not. Neither is the patient relieved by a bloodletting of the kind in question. Finally, even when the other conditions occur, if the blood be prevented either by the smallness of the opening or by any other obstacle from being let out in a full free stream, it will not be the true blood of pleurisy, and it will not be a benefit to the patient. I have also observed that, let the blood be let out as it may, if, whilst fresh drawn, you stir it with your finger, it will be red and florid at the surface, just as it is in other diseases. Be the blood, however, what it may, the disease, although it has a bad name, may be treated with success, if it be treated with skill. Medicine can save as many men from the jaws of death in cases of pleurisy as it can in any others. 5. After attentively considering the various phenomena of this disease, I think that it is a fever originating in a proper and peculiar inflammation of the blood, an inflammation by means of which nature deposits the peccant matter on the pleuris. Sometimes she lays it on the lung itself, and then there comes a parapneumony. Parapneumonies differ from pleurisies in degree only. They exhibit the results of the same cause with greater intensity. 6. In my treatment, I have the following aim in view: to repress the inflammation of the blood, and to divert those inflamed particles, which have made an onset upon the lining membrane of the ribs, and have there lit up so much mischief, into their proper outlets. For this reason, my sheet answer is venesection. As soon as I am sent for, I bleed from the arm to 10 ounces or more. Immediately after the bloodletting, the following draught is to be taken. Salprunella, 5g syrup of violets, 2 lg. Mix and make into a draught. At the same time, I prescribe the following emulsion. 7 sweet almonds, melon seeds, gourd seeds, ASS, white poppy seeds, 3 g. Pound together in a marble mortar and pour in gradually. Barley water, half a pound. Rose water, 5 IGSS mix, and make into an emulsion, of which 4 ounces are to be taken every 4 hours. I also order pectoral medicines to be taken frequently. The following are samples. 248 UA medical observations. Syrup of violets, syrup of maidenhair, ASCS. Mix and make into an aposem, of which take half a pound 3 times a day. Syrup of violets, syrup of maidenhair, AA, toji, sugar candy, thris. Mix and make into an eclagma, secundum, to be taken frequently during the day. Oil of sweet almonds alone or linseed oil, providing it be fresh drawn, is often very useful. 7. As to diet, I forbid meat altogether, and at the same time meat growths, however weak. The patient is allowed only barley and oatmeal gruel and panado. His drink is a tisson of barley water with the root of the wood sorrel or licorice root. Sometimes he has a little well-hopped small beer. Besides this, I order the following ointment. EKO of sweet almonds, 33. Pomade ointment or marshmallow ointment. AA pound J mix, and make into a liniment, to be rubbed on the side, affected night and morning. Cover the parts so rubbed with a cabbage leaf. To this treatment I adhere throughout the whole course of the disease. 8. The day on which I am called in case I find that the pain be oppressive, I order the same quantity of blood to be drawn, the same again the next day, and the same again on the 3rd day. I even go on to the 4th, so that, unless the patient previously recover, he has in cases where the pain and other symptoms are very violent, 4 continuous bleedings. If, however, either a less intense and a less dangerous form of the disease be present, whereby I am allowed to go at an easier rate with my remedies, or a dejection of strength on the part of the patient, will not bear bloodletting in such quick succession, I remain satisfied with the second venesection without caring to repeat it, except after the interval of a day or two between each. In all this I take for my rule the contraindications, and these are, on the one side, the mildness of the disease, on the other, the diminished strength of the patient. Now, although I like, in the treatment of diseases, to leave myself free to take away more or less in the way of bloodletting, according to the circumstances of the case, I have nevertheless rarely observed that a confirmed pleurisy in an adult subject has been cured with the loss of much less than 40 ounces of blood. In boys, however, 1 or 2 bleedings has generally been enough. As to the diarrhea that sometimes supervenes, it not only is no bar to bleeding, but it sometimes stops it. 9. Enemata I either wholly omit, or else give at long intervals between the bleedings, and at most of only sugar and milk. 10. During the disease, I look that the patient be not overheated, and I allow him at once to get up every day from his bed, and that for a few hours, just as his strength inclines him. In this sort of disease, it is of great importance that he be not continually bound down to his bed. If he be neither free evacuations of blood nor any other remedies, however, cooling will tell it all upon the aforesaid symptoms. 11. Soon after the last bleeding, if not before, all the symptoms improve, and the patient, who for some days longer must still be forbidden spirituous liquors and heavy food, will soon resume his strength. At this time, it is not out of place to solicit the bowels by a mild cathartic. 12. Now, if anyone be surprised that this method fails in even touching upon the expectoration, and much more in giving the details by which it should at different times be promoted, he may be informed that the omission is not referable to neglect. The point has been well considered, and has been passed over designedly. It has ever been my opinion that those who will entrust the elimination of the disease to expectoration play a dangerous game. Periculos plenum opus. Ali there is danger, and there is delay. Oftentimes the morbific matter may have been partially concocted, and may have been rejected, by the way of an anacatharsis, whilst the remaining may remain crude, and that in succession, and after the use of even the best expectorants, since expectoration is a process that may at one time go on, while at another be wholly suppressed. The sick man being meanwhile endangered and, as far as my control, which is none over the expectoration is concerned, being either for life or death. On the other hand, by means of bleeding, the morbific matter becomes my subject. An opening in the arm does the work of a windpipe. Moreover, I constantly insist that whilst a pleurisy, if treated after the manner that I have just condemned, is one of the broadest and easiest of the ways to death, it is, under its proper method, as certainly and as safely destroyed as any other ailment, to say nothing about the short time taken up in destroying it. Never have I known any mischief from the large detraction of blood, though unskilful men may think otherwise. 13. I often try to think out some plan of cure for pleurisy without such an expense of blood, either by means of resolving the humors or of promoting expectoration. I have, however, failed in finding any treatment like the aforesaid. As for that, notwithstanding the unfavorable prognosis of Hippocrates, in the case where the pleurisy is of the dry sort, I can always make it save the patient, independently of expectoration, so that the same bleeding shall let out the disease and let in convalescence. 14. But as the chief cure in this disease consists in an operation which is too much in the hands of unskilful barber surgeons, especially in country places remote from town, there is frequently the danger to the unhappy patient of the loss of a limb, or even of life from the pricking of a tendon. To meet this accident, I subjoin the following line of treatment. 15. When a patient is thus pricked, he does not feel the pain till about 12 hours after the bleeding, and that not in the parts about the opening, but in the tract between it and the axilla. This pain is most felt when the arm is extended. The immediate locality of the injury swells to about the size of a hazelnut and lets out a dribbling ichorous fluid, the discharge of which is preeminently diagnostic of a punctured tendon. I have seen with my own eyes that the proper treatment is as follows. E. roots of white lily ziv boiled to softness in 2 pounds of milk from the cow. Then take of linseed, oatmeal, suda. Strain the milk in which the roots were boiled, and boil therein the 2 sorts of meal, to the consistency of a cataplasm. Apply this night and morning to the affected parts. 1 at Enpot Roy, Evaportol, Ladzarat, Coke, Brenthr, CG Bastard, Parapneumoni, RR2CT, Chapter 27, The Works of Thomas Sydenham, Volume 1, Section 5, Bastard Parapneumony Elba, as the winter comes on, and oftener still as it is going off. And as spring one's approaching, there comes to light every year fever marked with numerous parapneumatic symptoms. LT attacks, by preference, the stout and fat, those who have reached or passed the heyday of life, and those who are over-addicted to spirituous liquors, brandy more especially. The blood of these men becomes loaded during the winter with an accumulation of phlegmatic humors, whilst as spring approaches it is excited to a new motion. Then cough takes occasion to set in, and administers to these same phlegmatic humors, and determines them to fall upon the lungs. And now, if the patient shall have lived carelessly, and if he still keep on drinking freely, the matter which has excited the cough grows gross, blocks up the passages to the lungs, and breathes upon the whole mass of the blood in the shape of fever. 2. At the first attack, the patient is hot and cold by turns, is giddy, and complains of a shooting pain in the head as often as the coughing becomes importunate. He vomits up what he drinks, sometimes coughing, sometimes not. The urine is turbid and intensely red, the blood of pleurisy. He pants for wind and draws his breath frequently and by jerks. If he be inclined to cough, his head feels as if it would split, and so he describes the feeling. The whole chest is in pain, and the wheezing of the lungs may be heard by the bystanders as often as the sick man coughs, since the lung is unable to dilate itself sufficiently, and its intumescences shuts up the vital passages. This intercepts the circulation, and the blood being, as it were, smothered, there shall be, as there often is with stout people, an absence of the signs of fever. This same absence of the signs of fever may also arise from the excess of phlegmatic matter, which must so clog the blood as to disable it from rising to a full and sufficient ebullition. In treating this fever, I make it my business to divert from the lungs, by means of venesection, the blood which creates the suffocation, and which lights up the inflammation. The lungs themselves I clear and cool with pectoral remedies, and by the help of a cooling diet I moderate the heat of the body at large. Now when it happens, on the one hand, that this sink of phlegm is lodged in the veins, is day by day supplying fuel to the fire of inflammation, and is in consequence appearing to indicate a frequent repetition of venesections, whilst on the other hand, the most careful observations that I have been able to make have taught me that such repetitions with patients of gross habits and with patients who have passed the prime of life are the origin of much mischief. And when this latter fact dissuades me from bloodletting no less than the former conditions may indicate it, I say that in such cases I purge freely, and make such purging supplementary to the venesection, a substitute which is rightly applied in those cases that will not bear a large and repeated loss of blood. 4. Hence I proceeded as follows. I kept my patient to his bed, bled him as he lay in it, and forbid him to get up for 2 or 3 hours. This I insisted upon because whilst all losses of blood to a certain extent shake and weaken the frame at large, this is the method for making them most tolerable. The patient who lies in bed will suffer less from a 10-ounce bleeding than one who is up from a bleeding of only 6 or 7 ounces. The next morning, the following draught must be taken: wine extract of cassia, 2 AGI, licorice, 5 AGI, fat figs, RV, senna leaves, 5 AGI. Agaric lozenges, 5 should boil in water, QS strain to 4 ounces. Dissolve in the strained liquor, mano 3, solutive syrup of roses, GSS, mix, and make into a draught. 5. The next day, I bleed again, then miss a day, and repeat the aforesaid purging drink. And so I bleed and purge and bleed till the patient get well. Such days as I do not purge, I recommend the pectoral decoction, sweet oil of almonds, and the H-key. Meat and meat broths I forbid, and still more strongly spirituous liquors, in the place of which I allow the patient, as his usual drink, a piston of barley water and licorice, and if he particularly request it, a little thin small beer. By this method can we overcome that bastard parapneumony, which originates in the overabundant collection of phlegm, accumulated during the winter and breaking out upon the lungs, a disease wherein we must purge as well as bleed. In the true parapneumony we must not do this. The true parapneumony is of the same nature as a pleurisy, except that it affects the lungs more universally. The true parapneumony and the true pleurisy are treated alike, that is, by bloodletting. By bloodletting in preference to cooling medicines, and to medicines of any other sort whatsoever. 7. This bastard parapneumony, although it somewhat approaches a dry asthma, and that in regard to the difficulty of breathing, as well as other symptoms, is still easily to be distinguished. Yet the fever of the bastard parapneumony is far less than the fever of the true. 8. Now this must be carefully noticed, viz., that when the patents who are struggling with the disease have been addicted to brandy and such like liquors, it will be unsafe to deprive them of the same too suddenly. It must be done by degrees. By this means there is less likelihood of the abrupt change paving the way to a dropsy. The same applies to all diseases thus originating. And now, as I am speaking of brandy, I will make a remark by the way. It were well if that spirit were either wholly banished or limited to the restoration, not the extinction of the vital spirits. Some may go farther and propose the entire abandonment of it for internal uses, confining it to surgical cases. 1E. As a dressing for the digestion of sores, or as an application in burns. For these it bears the bell from all other remedies. It defends the underlying skin from putrefaction and, so doing, effects a quick cure, so quick as not to wait for the naturally slow and leisurely process of digestion and the stages of digestion. Lint dipped in brandy and applied immediately after the injury to any part of the body that shall have been scalded with hot water or singed by gunpowder will do this, provided that, as long as the pain lasts, the spirit be renewed. After it has fairly ceased, once or twice a day will be sufficient. Chapter 28. The Works of Thomas Sydenham, Volume 1, Section 5, Rheumatism L2 disease may come on at any time. It is commonest, however, during the autumn, chiefly attacking the young and vigorous or uovi yavuv. It generally originates in some such cause as the following. The patient has been heated by either some over-violent exercise or by some other means and has taken cold upon it. The sad list of symptoms begins with chills and shivers. These are followed immediately by heat, disquietude, thirst, and the other concomitants of fever. 1 or 2 days after this, sometimes sooner, the patient is attacked by severe pains in the joints, sometimes in one and sometimes in another, sometimes in his wrist, sometimes in the knee on in, this last joint oftenest. This pain changes its place from time to time, takes the joints in turns, and affects the one that it attacks last with redness and swelling. Sometimes during the first days, the fever and the above-named symptoms go hand in hand. The fever, however, gradually goes off whilst the pain only remains. Sometimes, however, it grows worse. The febrile matter has, in that case, been transferred to the joints. This is clearly proved from the fact of the fever being frequently lit up afresh after the driving in of the morbific matter by the unseasonable use of external remedies. This disease, when separate from the fever, is often called arthritis, gout. Nevertheless, it differs essentially from that disease, as everyone knows who knows the two diseases well. This confusion may perhaps explain why it is that medical writers have passed so lightly over rheumatism, unless indeed we chose to suppose that the long list of human ailments has lately been increased by a fresh addition. Be this as it may, there is plenty of the disease nowadays, and although it very rarely, when once the fever has been driven off, kill the patient, it is still from the vehemence of the pain and from its protracted duration, no contemptible distemper. Treat it badly, Theocrat, idle, the 1470, and it will last for months and years. Nay, it will torment a patient throughout his miserable lifetime. Its violence indeed may vary, so that after the fashion of gout, it may come on at odd times, and in periodic fits. This, too, may happen after the aforesaid pains have been long, violent, and afflicting. Then they may cease of their own accord. The patient, however, shall be a ripple to the day of his death, and wholly lose the use of his limbs, whilst the knuckles of his fingers shall become knotty and protuberant, as in gout, with the knots showing most on the one side. With all this, the stomach shall be strong, and the patient be sound in other respects. 3. There is another species, although it is not generally so considered, of rheumatism. This may well be called rheumatic lumbago. Rheumatic lumbago consists in a violent fixed pain in the lumbar region, sometimes stretching as low as the sacrum. Except that the patient is not sick, an attack of lumbago simulates an attack of the kidneys. Over and above the violent and almost intolerable pain about the kidneys themselves, the course of the ureters from the kidney into the bladder is painful as well, the pain, however, being milder. This course of the pains originally deceived me, for I used to think that it depended on some gravelly matter adherent to the parts. Nevertheless, it was neither more nor less than the inflammatory and peccant matter of rheumatism, which had left the other parts of the body and afflicted these alone. This pain, unless got rid of like the pain of the common rheumatism, is equally excruciating, equally persistent. The miserable patient cannot his length, but either leaps from his bed or sits in it upright, rocking his body to and fro, now backwards and now forwards, sometimes drawn up, but always rocking himself painfully. 4. Now both the sorts of rheumatism arise from inflammation. No one doubts the inflammatory nature of pleurisy, and the blood of rheumatism is as like the blood of pleurisy, as one egg is like another. Hence the cure is to be sought in bloodletting. Meanwhile, the blood is to be tempered, and its fervor is to be repressed by cooling and thickening medicines and by proper regimen. 5 times 8. As soon as I am sent for, I draw blood from the arm of the side affected to 10 ounces, and then prescribe the following julep. GK water of water lilies, purslane water, lettuce water, AA zif, syrup of lemons, ESS, syrup of violets 3. Mix and make into a julep, to be taken ad libitum. Sometimes I order the emulsion for pleurisy instead. To allay the pain, I take care to apply a white bread poultice, made with milk and saffron, or else a cabbage leaf to the part affected. As to the diet, I forbid equally meat and meat broths, however weak and thin, substituting in their stead barley broth, oatmeal gruel, panado, and the like. For ordinary drink, I allow nothing stronger than a little thin small beer, or, what is better, a piston of barley flavored with licorice or sorrel. I also like the patient to be out of bed for a few hours every day, since the heat of a continual confinement will promote and aggravate the disease. 6. The following day, I order the same amount of blood to be drawn, and a day or two after, according to the strength of the patient, I bleed again. 3 or 4 days after this, I bleed for the 4th time, and this 4th bleeding, respect being had to the strength, age, constitution, and other conditions of the patient, is generally the last. I rarely bleed a 5th time unless there have gone before either too hot a regimen or too hot medicines. Now, anodines and paregorics require to be accompanied by very free bleedings indeed. Hence, if I mean to cure the disease by bleeding alone, I abstain during all the stages of a rheumatism from their use. They fix the disease and render it less amenable to bleeding, an operation which the over-officious use of anodynes renders necessary, oftener than would be the case otherwise. Besides this, they by no means always make good their title of anodyne. 7. During the careful application of the aforesaid remedies and diet, I now and then throw up a clister of sugar and milk on the day when the patient is not let blood. I even insist upon all these points being attended to for 8 days at least, Chap 2 Teat, Section 6, Obji after the last bleeding. Afterwards, I order a mild cathartic draught to be taken in the morning, and a full dose of syrup of white poppies, out of cowslip water, the evening after. This restrains the orgasm of the blood and guards against a relapse. All this being properly attended to, I allow the patient to return, by slow degrees, to his usual way of living in respect to air, exercise, and food, cautioning him, nevertheless, against wine, spices, salt meat, and all indigestible aliments. These he may not touch for a long time afterwards, after the bleedings. To the number aforesaid, the pains will be much lessened. They will not, however, wholly go off. They will only do this when the strength that has been lost along with the loss of blood shall be made good again. This recovery will take place quickest at the approach of the next season of the year, a season which conduces more to the restoration of the patient than the one in which he sickened. Under these conditions, the symptoms will one and all disappear, and the convalescent grow as strong as a wrestler. 9. Now, although the foregoing method, or one like it, will, if applied at the beginning of the disease, determine a favorable conclusion, it still happens, and that frequently, that where the patient has been badly treated, and treated after a wholly contrary fashion, he will be troubled during the remainder of his life with wandering pains, sometimes mild, sometimes severe, which pains easily deceive the incautious, and pass for the symptoms of scurvy. Now upon this point I will speak, by the way, and I will speak freely. That scurvy is rife and common in the northern countries, I admit. That it is so common as is generally believed, I doubt. Many of the cases of the so-called scurvy are cases of disease in the process of formation, many of disease imperfectly subdued. The first have yet to take their type and character, the latter have yet to cease contaminating T blood. For instance, the fresh matter that is about to generate gout, until such time as it has fallen upon the joints, shows itself in symptoms that pass for the symptoms of scurvy. Yet, when once gout has been formed and has exhibited itself by act and deed, no one mistakes it for anything but itself. 10. I know, too, that many symptoms, like the symptoms of scurvy, attack really gouty patients after they have rid them. X-cells of the gouty fits. This may arise from the unseasonable use of evacuants, from the effects of old age, or from any other cause that may have interrupted nature in her attempt to unload the arthritic matter in its full entirety upon the joints. Such matter retained, yet useless, corrupts the whole mass of the blood, and distresses the patient with bad symptoms upon bad symptoms. This applies to incipient dropsy as well as to departing gout. The saying of the vulgar is as follows: when scurvy ends, dropsy begins. Now this only means that when a dropsy has fairly shown itself by clear signs, the preconceived notion of a scurvy falls to the ground. The same applies to many other chronic diseases, whether they be yet in a state of growth and waiting to take their type and character, or partially dispersed, yet not wholly subdued and exterminated. Unless we admit this, the term scurvy will take an undue extension, as it really does nowadays, and comprise nearly every sort of disease, if, however, we carefully exert ourselves in the close investigation of disease. Follow them to their secret hiding places, lift up the veil that disguises their symptoms, and see them in their own true forms. There will be no difficulty in distributing them according to their proper families. Always remember that the method of cure is the method for the disease as it exists in its full and perfect form, and in its real acts and deeds, and not the method of any adulterate and counterfeit symptoms. And here I may remark that when the rheumatism has taken deep root and is of some years' standing, it is not so well to bleed at short intervals as it was at the onset of the malady. It is better to separate the venisections by intervals of a few weeks. This will be enough to drive away the disease, or at least bring it to the point when issues in either leg or draughts of any volatile spirit taken morning and evening out of canary wine will extirpate its relics. 12. Now, however great may be the difference between true rheumatism and true scurvy, there is a sort of the former disease which cannot be denied to approach, both in respect to its symptoms and its cure, the latter. And this I shall call scorbutic rheumatism. The pains come sometimes in one part, sometimes in another. They seldom occasion much suffering, seldom are attended with fevers. They are less fixed to one spot, are more erratic and more uncertain, their accompanying symptoms being anomalous and disorderly also. At times it afflicts this or that joint, at times the inward parts only. Here it produces suffering, which suffering goes off when the pain again transfers itself outwardly. Thus it harasses the patient by turns and prolongs itself to the duration of the most chronic amongst the chronic diseases. It seizes chiefly women and weakly men, so much so that, were it not for its resistance to hysteric remedies, it might pass for a sort of hysteria. 18. Those who have used the Jesuit's bark for a long time together are liable to this affection, and I may state, by the way, that it is the only mischief I have seen arise therefrom. Whether, however, this or any other cause have given rise to the scurvy in question, the following recipes will easily cure it, recipes of which I would have made a secret, had I not thought more of the public good than of my own private emolument. By means of these alone I have cured many whom bleedings, frequently repeated, had failed to cure, and with whom purges and milk diets and testaceous powders had been just as useless. Here they are: Mike's conserve of garden scurvy grass, fresh dollar. Conserve of wood sorrel 5J, compound powder of cuckoo pint 5 ev, syrup of oranges, QS fiat elector. Of this take 2 drachmas 3 times a day for a whole month, washing it down with 3 ounces of the following water: leaves of brooklime, leaves of watercress, leaves of sage, leaves of mint, 4 handfuls, the peel of 6 oranges, bruised nutmeg, steep in 12 pounds of Brunswick mum, and distill off in a common still 6 pounds. The dose of the compound powder of cuckoo pint must be strictly observed. At any rate, it must not be diminished. Chapter 29. The Works of Thomas Sydenham, Volume 1, Section 5, Erysipelatous Fever 1. Tut's disease attacks any and all parts of the body at any and all seasons of the year. The face, however, is its more particular part, in the summer its chief season. The patient is taken whilst out of doors. His face swells suddenly, and the swelling is accompanied with exceeding pain and redness. It was also marked by thick patches of very small pustules. These enlarge from inflammation and gradually become vesicular, spread along the brow and head, ooze up the eyes through their puffiness and magnitude, and, with the exception of the presence of pustules, are not very unlike the swellings which are left by the stings of wasps or bees. This is the common and usual form of erysipelas. The country people call it a blight. Whatever be the part of the body, and whatever be the time of year, there runs generally the combination of chills and shivers. These attend the inflammation, unless indeed they have preceded it, which they sometimes do by 2 or 3 days. Besides these, there are thirst, inquietude, and the other symptoms of fever. As the disease goes on, the fever produces pain, swelling, and other symptoms, which day by day increase and sometimes terminate in gangrene. These, in their turn, react upon the fever until are restrained by appropriate remedies. 3. There is another form of this disease, although one of rare occurrence. It comes on at any season of the year, but is chiefly referable to the circumstance of the patient having overindulged in the use of the more thin and fiery wines, or else in some similar spirituous liquor. The fever leads the way. A crop of pustules follows and covers the whole body. These are like the stings of nettles. At times they rise to vesicles. At times they recede under the skin like tubercles, in which case they itch intolerably and show themselves afresh as often as they are scratched, be the scratching ever so slight. I consider that in this disease peccant matter is mixed with the blood and that it must be evacuated. Also, that the ebullition of the blood must be regulated by cooling remedies. Also, that matter which has become impacted in the parts must be discussed and eliminated. To do this, I bleed from the arm forthwith, and I find the blood like the blood of pleurisy. The next day, I exhibit my usual mild cathartic, and at bedtime, in case the patient has passed too many motions, a paregoric draught, such as syrup of poppies out of cowslip water, or something of the sort. The purging being over, I foment the part with the following decoction. Marshmallow root, mallow leaves, elder leaves, mullein leaves, each 2 handfuls. Melalote flowers, John's wort tops, tops of the lesser centauri, each a handful. Linseed fenugreek seeds, AASES boiled down, in a sufficient quantity of water to 3 pounds. Strain the liquor. Add, when wanted for use, 2 ounces of spirits of wine to every pound of the decoction. Apply stoops of warm light flannel, soaked in the mixture, and well wrung twice a day to the part affected. After the fomentation, anoint with EK spirits of wine, Palms SS, Venice treacle 3 Ig, long pepper powdered, Palms powdered AA. Virgimix apply on blotting paper to the part affected. 5 fart. In the meanwhile, the patient must live on barley broth, oatmeal gruel, and roasted apples. He may, moreover, take a little of the smallest beer and leave his bed for a few hours daily. To this method, the fever, with its symptoms, will generally give way in a short time. If not, I bleed a second time, and sometimes even a third time. This I do at the interval of a day, provided also that the blood remain in a bad diathesis, and that the fever be kept up. On the day when I omit the venesection, I order an enema of milk and syrup of violets, and cooling juleps of lily water, as in rheumatism, the juleps being taken every hour. Generally, however, the single bleeding, and the subsequent purgation, if applied in time, carry off the complaint. The erysipelas, which looks like nettle stings, may be similarly treated, except that it requires less in the way of external applications. 6. I may now make a remark, by the way. Although the affections of which we are speaking, as well as the generality of those which attack the skin, and are accompanied with an eruption, provided that they be chronic, easily give way to this treatment, and take themselves off after the repetition of a purge and venesection. There are others of the same kind which must be treated in a manner wholly opposite. With them, there is no good in repeated evacuations, and no hope in testaceous powders for the sweetening of the blood, inasmuch as certain recrementitious matters of a bad diathesis are attached so closely to the skin that they are attacked and removed only by those medicines which give strength and tone to the blood, and which have the property of acting as deobstruents upon the pores of the skin. In virulent pruritus and in cutaneous eruptions akin to it, I resort to the following treatment, and I derive from it no common success. K. Venice treacle, 585. Agalexuary DJ, Virginian snake root, finely powdered. GF. Oriental bezoar, GRV, syrup of candied citron, QS, make into a bolus, to be taken every day at night and morning for 3 weeks. Along with this drink, 6 spoonfuls of the following julep, Kaya Cardui Benedicti $VJ, plague water, treacle water, AA 3I, syrup of gilliflower cloves, 3 mix and make into a julep. 7. Every morning after his physic, the patient must sweat for an hour or 2, or what is better, let him be in bed, cover himself with extra blankets, and perspire moderately. After this, if the pustules still remain, the following liniment must be applied to the parts affected. These medicines must not be used except after bleeding and purging, operations which, although they do not by themselves effect the full and perfect cure, still protect the patient against the fever that would otherwise arise from the use of heating medicines. 8. There is another form of eruption which is less frequent than the present ones, and wholly unassailable by evacuations. It may appear anywhere. Generally, however, it appears on the breast, fixes itself on some particular part, just or hardly rises above the skin, spreads in a broad patch, is sometimes porogenous, sometimes furfuraceous, and has its squamule of a color approaching to yellow. Whether this be a macula or an impetigo, a spot or a tetter, the patient does well as long as it is out. When, however, it goes in, as it often does, he suffers a slight degree of disorder, and his urine becomes turbid and of a red or rather reddish-yellow color. In treating this, we follow the treatment of virulent scabies, the same remedies, the same general evacuations, and the same order of exhibition. Besides this, wine and digestible animal food are allowable. Indeed, the use of refrigerants is more bad than good. Thus is this last form of disease cured. At times, however, nothing will cure it except the prolonged use of chalybeate waters. Chapter 30. The Works of Thomas Sydenham, Volume 1, Section 5, Quinsy 1, Tours, comes on at all seasons of the year, but most during the transition from spring to summer. It attacks young persons most, especially if they be of a sanguine temperament, and, an observation I have often made, have red hair. Chills and shivers usher it in. Fever follows. Next come pain and inflammation of the fauces. And unless these last symptoms be speedily relieved, the patient becomes unable to either swallow his food or breathe through his nostrils, whilst the fauces are closed with a feeling of strangulation, the uvula, the tonsils, and the larynx all being swollen, and all but suffocation being induced. Great is the danger of this ailment. At times it kills within a few hours. In such cases, an excess of febrile matter has been thrown upon the above-named parts, and the impending storm has been insufficiently met by appropriate management. 2. I bleed freely from the arm, and also from each side of the tongue. I then touch the parts inflamed with the honey of roses, made as sharp as possible with spirits of sulfur. Besides this, I order the following gargle, and I order it after a manner different from the one in common use, by recommending it to be kept quietly in the mouth until it grow warm, when it is to be spit out and renewed. Chique plantain water, red rose water, frog spawn water, aazif, white of egg beaten upon water, sich, white sugar candy, 3. Dia gavgarisma. Finally, I add the daily use of the emulsion for pleurisy or of some similar one, 9. The next day, unless the fever and pain in swallowing have in some degree abated, I bleed again from the arm, postponing the purgative for the day following, if, however, de quinsy. 265. The diminution of both symptoms, I order a lenitive electuary once. This, after venesection, is of preeminent value, and, as I have ascertained by manifold experience, of paramount necessity. Very rarely indeed do the fever and other symptoms cause alarm after this. If they do, they are to be arrested by bleeding and a strong large blister to the nape of the neck. Throughout the whole course of this disease, an emollient and cooling enema is to be thrown up every morning on those days when no purgatives are given. In this way is the patient to be supported. 4. Meat of all sorts is forbidden, and so are all meat broths. Barley broth, oatmeal gruel, and roasted apples are allowed. So are tisons and barley, and so is the smallest of small beer. The bed may be left for a few hours every day, since the warmth of it helps the fever and helps those other inflammatory symptoms which I take so much trouble to allay. In respect, however, to the angina, quinsy, which is a symptom of the stationary fever, it must be treated the same way as the fever itself is treated, either by diaphoresis and action through the pores of the skin, or by any other form of treatment adapted to the primary fever. This I have verified by careful observation. 5. Besides these, there are other fevers of the class of infecurrents, but as these go off directly in some different manner, and terminate in some particular symptom, They are not commonly termed fevers. Nevertheless, they are such in origin. The affection from which the disease takes its name is only a symptom of some fever terminating therein. Two of these are all that I shall at present mention, and that slightly, viz. Hemorrhage from the nostrils and hemoptysis. 6. Bleeding from the nose comes on at any and all times of the year. It attacks subjects of hot blood and a weak temperament, and that more in the decline of life than in its spring. At the first attack it shows like fever. This makes its way through the nostrils, michua tua data porta root. During its escape there are pain and heat and distress in the front of the head. At length it leaves off of itself altogether, either under the effects of remedies, or else from having become diminished and exhausted. The patient, however, may expect an annual relapse, as often as his system becomes inflamed by either spirituous liquors or any other exciting causes. 7. This is what I aim at. The heat and ebullition of the blood are too great. From this arises unnatural extravasation, and for this reason it is to be restrained, and its impetus is to be diverted elsewhere. With this view I bleed frequently and freely, and I find that the blood is the blood of pleurisy. The dye I order is refrigerant and inspissating 3 parts water to 1 of milk, boiled and drunk in cool boiled apples, barley broths, and other vegetable forms of food, cooling and thickening juleps, and those emulsions which have already been described as remedial to inflammation. The bed may be left for a short time every day. A lenitive and cooling enema must be thrown up every day, never by any chance omitted. Finally, by a draught of the paregoric of diacodium, the fury of the blood may be kept within limits, as by a chain. When, however, as is often the case, hemorrhages of the sort in question are accompanied by an acrid lymph, which mixes itself up with the blood and opens the orifices of the veins, over and above the revulsive and refrigerative treatment, I prescribe a mild cathartic, and that even at the height of the disease. When this has done acting, I follow it up with an anodyne of full strength and somewhat more. When the symptom has wholly vanished, I give a cathartic again. 8. In respect to external applications, the best are linen rags, doubled twice, steeped in cold water with sal prunella, and afterwards lightly wrung out, to be applied to the nape and to both sides of the neck several times a day. After the evacuations are completed, the following mixture should be applied. Alum eazijay, plegma vitriolicum pounds SS boil, until all the matters are dissolved, cool, and filter. Separate the crystals. Add to the remaining liquor a 12th part of the oil of vitriol, wet a plug of lint in the solution, and place it in the nostril from whence the blood comes. Leave it there for 2 days. Rags steeped in this liquor stay blood from all parts of the body equally. 9. Hemoptysis attacks subjects of warm but weak temperament subjects, whose lungs are weak young men rather than old, and it attacks them most between spring and summer. It has most of the characters of the last named hemorrhage. Both are fevers, and both throw off their name and essence under the influence of the crisis by which they are resolved. The chief difference lies in the difference of the parts to which the blood is determined. In the former disease, they are the nostrils; in the latter, the lungs. In the one case, the head is the seat of the pain. The lungs suffer in the other. Heat and pain characterize the bleeding from the nose. Weakness of the chest attends the pulmonary hemorrhage. The method is nearly the same in both cases, except that the lung affection admits of less purging than the other, since hypercatharsis may throw the patient into a decline. Instead of this, however, we may bleed frequently, may throw up daily injections, may prescribe an opiate at bedtime, and may support the patient by means of an inspissating and refrigerant regimen, both in regard to his medicine and his diet. And this is what I have up to this time observed concerning that numerous tribe of diseases, which falling into many families is called fever. These are my observations upon fever and its symptoms. In stating them, I have seriously been on the guard against any imaginations of my own. I have dealt in no fancies. In a candid and sincere spirit, in a spirit free and unrestrained by hypotheses, have I published their natural history and their symptoms, And if I have added their treatment, I have added it in a similar spirit of good faith and caution. And if the ardent desire of first discovering and then establishing some methods of protecting human life more certain and less unsteady than the methods hitherto applied shall have drawn me forward into fresh paths and into paths that none before have trodden, I hope and trust that men of true learning will impute to me neither the contempt for the better judgments of other men, nor the love of new fashions in practice. I take great courage from the results that have as yet confirmed my investigations, and I trust to posterity as a witness for the future. A murderous array of disease has to be fought against, and the battle is not a battle for the sluggard. Day by day is there the combat against the life of man, and there is neither truce nor quarter. Many die by violent deaths, but with the exception of these, 2/3 of our race die of fever, continuous attacks, and daily victories over strong men in the flower of their age on the part of the disease. In efficient resistance, and specious though confident, as peculation on the part of the physician, these it was that dissatisfied my reflections, and showed me the worthlessness of the vain crotchets of fanciful men, when the question was a question of lost health seeking restoration, and when, in the face of the promises of braggart dogmatists, those patients who had recourse to such assistance fared neither better nor worse than if the resources of art had been neglected altogether, and their trust had been put in nature alone. Now, if I shall have done anything towards diminishing the risk, or even towards lightening the difficulties which occur in the treatment of these diseases, and I allow myself to hope that something has so been done, I have gained the object that I had in view. My hard labors are rewarded by the good that L have done my neighbor. These are there or thereabouts the chief points which I have made good concerning the fevers, and the symptoms that arise out of them up to the present date. 1. December 30th, 1675, at any rate, they are the chief points that I have been able to reduce to any method. Eo poundero evi puror. In the editions of 1666 and 1668, there are several passages which are omitted in the improved edition of 1685. These are given with great care in Dr. Greenhill's Latin text. Sometimes the propositions contained in such passages are merely verbal, while sometimes they have a value as illustrations of the history of Sydenham's opinions. Where they are of this latter character, they will be found translated, more or less closely, and more or less fully in the following appendices. For the more minute purposes of bibliography, reference to the original text was necessary. I. Appendix A, Section 1, Chapter 4, $40, pages 56 and 65 of Dr. Greenhill's edition, are more especially adapted to that species of fever which is more especially general and familiar. Besides this, there are other species mutually differing from each other, with various points of difference generated by the irregular constitutions of certain years. To reduce these into classes according to the variety of their phenomena, to work out their idiopathic characters, to accommodate to each in detail its proper method of cure. This is a work requiring much opportunity, a work of great difficulty, and the work for the life of a single physician might possibly be insufficient, since the accumulation of observations must needs be large, and the order of years for the appearance of the same epidemics is uncertain. The more remarkable forms of fever, and the forms requiring any notable difference of treatment, are 2-1 in number, one the commoner sort, which we have just dealt with, the other the pestilential fever, which we shall deal with anon. 2/0 Appendix A, all seasons of all years indifferently. Now this I believe to be just as dangerous as it would be dangerous to treat the peculiar temperaments of different patients similarly and promiscuously. In the first place, I must treat upon the various modes of cure which apply to the various fevers of various years. Here we must weigh steadily the following fact, viz., that, however much we may allow of other differences from other causes between fever and fever, their chief difference consists in the difference between the subject matter to which the febrile commotion is inherent, whilst this difference itself coincides with the different diatheses of the blood, according as such diatheses are induced by the season of the year. The febrile commotion of a spring fever is a febrile commotion of blood in its full freshness. That of an autumn fever, the commotion of blood in its decline, and of blood impoverished by the heat of the preceding season. Now, just as the invasion of a fever is regulated by the nearness or distance in time between these two seasons, so does the fermentation that it engenders coincide with the fermentation of this or that part of the year. Now, this agrees with what I have observed in practice, viz., that autumnal fevers are more dangerous and of a worse character than spring fevers. Autumnal fevers are the fevers of an impoverished blood, and for this reason will ill bear evacuation specially in the way of bloodletting. No matter how beneficial such evacuations might have been in spring, autumn forbids them. Perhaps this degeneration, originating as it does in poverty of blood, and occurring along with autumnal fevers, may give rise to a general deprivation of the humors at large. This, too, may beget the symptoms of ill-conditioned fevers, nay, even ill-conditioned fever itself. Now, in such cases, nature becomes excited to action, exerts herself against the disease, and undertakes its elimination by the means of a fresh ebullition. Now, this ebullition the physician must sustain by cordials, rather than depress by evacuations and refrigerants. It is the instrument of nature. Be the corruption of the blood what it may, if the necessary ebullition cannot be both got up and kept up, the disease will be either protracted or deadly. In autumnal fever, blood must be drawn carefully, and in all cases where the patient is either below the age of adolescence or beyond the heyday of life, not at all. Except in cases of excessive heat or robust youth, refrigerants are dangerous, whilst vomiting, especially if there have been nausea, is necessary. Generally that of the belly. With adults, it is the feet that swell first. Then, as the case may be, the belly follows and dropsy sets in, proceeding from the difference between fever so determined by the appendix A. 2/1 difference of years and the difference of treatment as determined by the difference of the fever, we come to the causes of such differences. Now these cannot be laid down. A year may be epidemic, not only in respect to plagues, but also one respect to fevers of only ordinary malignity, the reasons being referable to neither depraved aliments, nor putrescent exhalations of the lower atmosphere, nor yet to inordinate and unequal changes from hot to cold or from cold to hot. In such cases we must confess our ignorance, and admit only a blind, inexplicable, and malignant constitution of the atmosphere. Now, just as we have no principles by which we can explain the difference between the fevers of different years, so we have no means of judging from the healthiness or unhealthiness of a past season as to the healthiness or unhealthiness of a coming one. The winters of 1662 and of 1663 differed from each other, in the fact of the one being extraordinarily mild and the other being wonderfully cold. Yet each followed a mild autumn, preceded by a mild summer. From my own practice, I know of only 2 observations by which we can, during the current summer, prognosticate the healthiness or unhealthiness of the autumn that is to follow. Of the healthiness or unhealthiness, one respect to fevers. TF fevers, continued or intermittent, appear unnaturally early. The season that follows will be exceedingly favorable to the development of epidemics. By early, I mean on or before Midsummer Day, if the fever be of the quartan kind, 1e. Of the kind which is the true blood of autumn, this will be the case all the more. In 1661, when over and above the continued fevers, malignant tertians took off whole families, a female neighbor of my own was taken with her first quartan ague fit on the 24th of June. Many more were similarly and prematurely attacked by the same fevers that afterwards prevailed so epidemically, a proof that, in the temperature of the atmosphere of that time, there were the preliminaries of the diseases that set in so thickly the year after. Kiev remarked that if swarms of insects, especially houseflies, were abundant in the summer, the succeeding autumn was unhealthy. This I observed to be the case during the whole summer of the aforesaid year, whilst in the summers of the 2 following years, which were very healthy, the insects were very few. Still, I must remark that at the approach of even so severe a disease as the plague itself, they were not observed to be very abundant. Yea, with these 2 exceptions, I have observed that all prognostics are fallacious, so that the foreknowledge of the character of a coming epidemic constitution is very difficult, and not marked by any conspicuous signs. Nor is it less difficult to propose any certain and determinate principle of treatment which shall accurately answer to the difference of fevers dependent upon the different temperament of the year, than it is as aforesaid. To explain the causes of the annual differences themselves, or even to predict by means of any previous prognostic the difference between this year or that in the matter of healthiness or unhealthiness. However, I shall not think it too much trouble to explain, in a few words, those things which have presented themselves to my attentive observation. In such autumnal fevers as occur at an over-early period under a constitution particularly epidemic, i.e. in quartans or malignant tertians, that show themselves as soon as midsummer day, bleeding is dangerous. The autumn of the year aforesaid proved this. Unless the patient were of an age and vigor to bear it easily, bleeding did mischief, especially at the beginning of the season. It might not indeed cause death, but it did cause a protraction of the distemper. Other evacuations were not equally dangerous, emetics in particular being useful then, as they were useful in other similarly malignant constitutions. All which has taught me the importance of the physician being ready and willing to adapt himself to the very varied circumstances of a very changing scene. I allow myself, however, to add that, in the way of a general method of treatment, what has preceded is of sufficient scope and latitude, notwithstanding the extent to which changes of years and season forbid the exhibition of overstringent rules. The best that can be done when a fever first sets in is to observe the character of its access and the juventia and ladenza in the way of treatment. Doubtless, and I think that the aforesaid method will not be found far from the mark. In my own hands there has been but little deviation from it, at least in such fevers as on net best suits. 1 fevers where a dew fermentation is nature's best instrument, and wherein such dew fermentation, in order to expel the latent peccant matters, must duly be kept up. Section 1, Chap V, $1.29. The substance of a statement contained in the editions of 1666 and 1668, and not occurring in the edition of 1685, will be found in that portion of the Life of Sydenham which contains the account of the use of cinchona bark in intermittents. CP 80 of Dr. Greenhill's edition, Appendix B, Section 3, Chapter 3. In the editions of 1666 and 1668, I have no hesitation in saying that from this source originates a whole catalogue of ills. The ebullition at the beginning of the disease sets in with violence, and the nurses are overhandy with their cordials, with Gascoigne's powder, Diascordium, and the like. With these they hope, God willing, to expel the smallpox at once, and to remove the poison from the heart. They use with equal hardihood another remedy of great same, and, as they think, safe I mean posset, with hartshorn and marigolds. More mischief is done every year by this heating regimen than by any medical treatment, however apparently dangerous, and however abhorrent from the principles of reason, meaning thereby their own views. Page 131 of Dr. Greenhill's edition. Section 3, Chap. It, Section 36. In the editions of 1666 and 1668. In the next place, if the effervescence of the blood shall have become so sluggish as to give just reason for fearing that it may be incompetent to a due separatio, and we may promote it by cordials. These are fittest under the following conditions: excessive previous depletion, a fat plethora habit, previous disease, present evacuations, present gonorrhea. In any such cases as these, the secretion will fall short unless held up by cordials. Hence, the eruption of pustules will fail, and the patient die. I believe for my own part that such an upshot is not to be referred to any malignity whatever. It is simply the inability of the blood to carry out the change and renovation of itself that it has taken in hand. Its state is morbid, its position precarious. It cannot go back to its first state. It cannot make good its attempt at a new one magnus excidit ossus. I admit, however, that at the very time of expulsion, when the secreted matter comes to suppuration, if, from any reason, the same be thrown inwards, the recession causes certain death. Now this does arise from corruption, viz., the corruption of the secretion itself, page 132 of Dr. Greenhill's edition, Section 3, Chapter $2.59. If bleeding cannot be resorted to, either from hesitation on the part of the physician, or from the youth or age of the patient, the heat of the distemper must by no means be increased. For this reason, the patient must be as much out of bed as he would be when in health, and weather permitting, there must be no fire in the room. Small beer, warm, with a toast in it, oatmeal gruel, roasted apples, and the like, must be his meat and drink. Anything stronger, even hartshorn posset, I forbid. Thus the ebullition will gradually and spontaneously subside, and the symptoms decrease before mischief sets in, provided always that the blood be but moderately exasperated and tolerant of the respite required. Dr. Greenhill's edition. P. 145. 18 Section 2T Chap B2. Extracts from the editions of 1666 and 1668. See Dr. Greenhill's edition, pages 149 to 152. Now, as it is usual in writing upon fever, to touch upon measles and smallpox also, I will tread in the steps of my predecessors. I shall, however, include both diseases under the head of smallpox, partly for the sake of brevity, partly because the treatment is alike. This is the case, notwithstanding the difference of their nature, a point upon which I shall say nothing for the present. ITT think the smallpox is a disease superinduced upon the blood during an attempt at a new status. Human blood is a rich and luxuriant liquor containing many rich juices, and remaining unchanged for no long time together. Now, once during a lifetime, this liquor throws off, like a slough, its native habit and texture, adapts itself for undergoing so notable a change, and, so to say, puts on a new form. I think that I see a reason why blood, not so changed already, changes easily. A slight impulse determines it, the effluvia from sick men, even as ripe apples ripen the apples that hang next to them. The same happens with other bodies, whether their surfaces touch or whether they influence one another from a distance. The case is the same with the blood. Indeed, the other bodies just mentioned are less prone to change than the preeminently changeable blood. This principle accounts for the contagion of smallpox, as well as any doctrine founded upon its malignity. Nay, it involves fewer complications than are involved in the idea of a malignant and poisonous matter lurking in the blood, and expelled from the same. I cannot see how, as it were, in a single moment of time, any man's blood can, by simple contagion, be supplied with that large amount of purulent matter that is secreted in smallpox. Neither can I understand upon the notion of malignity how it is that a patient, once affected, can mix with other patients sick of the smallpox with impunity. This is not what we see in other diseases. Connection with a diseased female infects with those who have previously been diseased, and those who have not, the liability being the same on both sides. I am not ignorant that persons have been attacked twice with smallpox. The fact, however, is too rare to affect the general statement that one attack insures against another. As for the impurity and foulness of the excreted matters in all forms of smallpox, and in autumnal poxes most, it proves no more than is proved by the fact of contagion. The blood having taken in hand a change and renovation selects a certain amount of particles belonging to its mass, and these, although pure enough whilst mixed with the blood at large, become, by aggregation, and the adoption of a new texture, depraved and corrupt after a depraved and corrupt fashion. This is the case of parts of the food taken into the stomach. They undergo a change. The depressions of the pockmarks, autumnal and winter ones more especially, prove as little. All ulcers leave deep marks behind them. Cause a further proof that the true cause of smallpox is no pre-existence in the blood of poisonous particles, and no irritation creating the appendix B2, overnight expulsion of the same, but that it is the effort of the blood to bring about a certain change. I adduce the following observation. I have seen persons not deeply marked, nor yet deformed by the pockmarks, but yet changed in the whole character of their features, lineaments, and bodily frame. This looks as if the intervention of the smallpox had effected that full and perfect renovation which nature designed. Now, as to whether this be the origin of smallpox, or whether it be capable of any better explanation, I will not enter into further controversy. The treatment rests on the following principles. Devist. That there is a matter for separation and expulsion, and unless separation and expulsion take place, death takes place instead. If petilism supervene, which it often does with grown-up people, and after the use of cordials and a hot regimen, Our chances improve. Previous bad treatment has been made good by this symptom. The disease, deflected from its not too raw outlet, escapes thus. Hence, if we keep up the salvation, we may be easier about the pustules. This, however, we must bring about in a laudable manner. Beware of checking or disturbing it. Abstain from gargles, for gargles have checked the spit and killed the patient. All that I allow him is, that he may, if necessary, rinse his mouth with a little warm small beer, more especially after an autumnal smallpox. 3. Gin, let no one blame me for writing thus at large, when the 2 simple words do nothing would suffice. I would fain spare myself the trouble of a long exposition, were it not that I find my opinion to lie at equal distances from the 2 opinions that have hitherto prevailed among men. The first considers bleeding as imperative, and follows up the bleeding by such refrigerant medicines as may repress the ebullition of the blood. The other vehemently inculcates the use of a hot and cordial regimen, under the notion that such is the guidance of nature, and that such is the proper effort for forcing the malignity of the disease from the center to the circumference of the frame. Now, an opinion without grounds would have been absurd, whilst the concealment of my sentiments would have been dishonest, since each of the other modes of practice has killed enormous quantities of patients. 276, Appendix C. Appendix C, Section 6, Chapter $1. In the editions of 1666 and 1668, I am aware that it is a received opinion that that kind of continued fever which accompanies pleurisy is considered to originate from inflammation falling upon the lining membrane of the chest and the parts of the heart. Hence, in respect to the pleurisy, it is a symptom rather than a substantive disease. I find no fault with this view. Meanwhile, I also believe that the pleurisy itself is sometimes a symptom, and that in respect to the original fever by which the patient was first seized, anterior to the supervention of the pleurisy. After this, the fever lays aside its original character and becomes converted into a pleurisy, whilst the pleurisy, from the access of fresh inflammation, generates, as its accompaniment, a new fever. This goes pari passu and stands or falls with the pleurisy. I believe that, after due examination, it would be a hard matter to find a single instance of that undoubted sign of pleurisy, viz. Pain in the side having set in without some fever or other little or much having preceded it. True as it is that the pain occurs, it occurs after the fever, sometimes sooner, sometimes later, but still after the fever. Perhaps in doing so, I may be humoring my own peculiar doctrine. Nevertheless, as far as I may rely on my observations, I consider the pleurisy as an accident and a consequent to the fever. Page 276 of Dr. Greenhill's edition. End of OI. Printed by C. and J. Adlard, Bartholomew Close, London, equals 20 CT and Nihes, APSP PO and AUDTL, GDTL. In 3x2 Company, TSEBT. SOS me on EGERIS OSA JET by OTBLI honorary FTA is UA 47.4 Jeff 4 p.m. Rare FD LA 28 on RN PACA TL REX GX ATI A 42447 4D ATAS BR do Rupiers STR DPCP Voy PLR Adiavines KNM IDC Sense 9 Spia SS pulpa vision en roan arara nunencias. Enia as aenia socorro and thou oren. Eans rori de SCNPTS Mason P. Rico. En el de dot sichet secada. An a 39 enan. Pound 56, a 2 pi 28. Enil iceco can panoin. On tenens y didon in PA. A keypad PD Ina Lara R Orono Dia Cap RI on Versich and ES Paeda and Phonetics Pretabs 425 Waxa Pan in AC Savinci PN on Head Ebrara C Noah US dollar 452 as AC as ARP2SPE. A Dale Natai raised ton on JNPP $2T CSC and UNNA and YCOM P a day each dollar T at era a UAET as CAF UAB Elekir EK Castia Dide de ID to 2 passes, 42,644,754 UA. Is Coda as noon punch clinic and on PC died. Into the pound VSPSPRNA Z 4UD and Immortalias. AZ rare E pi CD dead was this and PBF down IRA is rare. Is it as PPF or IR Lassie and PS. Your E 20,524. 2G4C set up pure SOS IRNS. Chia's PD CPS OSNOS Mundus U13 or I or EAAA IEDWDD Pasas Accessas Interfiti SAD ADIA Excel and DED ASS US DOS is a slide ID AII AIDHCNCN NT Redites QC Iris ASRA as is dual Miss KSP HUIS Kali TWR Kiza as Sali TD whatever municipal or Pi DCD. Oh, Nebula R DDR. We are networks HL SBPS gas A PD pound SUD Pi SPCDC and the node side X. UIPIFPS Life here and PSS out synthesis at JVP at instance PS44 DPP.